Let's get started. Today I want to talk about popular culture, which is generally thought to be one of the United States' contributions, either glorious or infamous, to the world. At the time when this course begins, at the end of the 19th century, the United States is already the largest agricultural and industrial producer in the world, but it is an unimportant place as far as cultural production is concerned. It was primarily importing its culture from Europe in pretty much most areas. It had developed certain kinds of local color kinds of entertainments, which, because of the wide breadth of the country, the size of the country, required a fair amount of organization to be able to distribute. But these were still secondary to imported culture in most respects. But when we talk about popular culture of the United States spreading across the world, what I really want to focus on is Hollywood on the one hand, and the popular music, which first with jazz, and the real spread of these two cultural forms, their growth, their flourishing, actually comes with World War I, not before. Certainly, American cultural practices were starting to spread if we look at the organization of advertising. So the first American advertising agency opens a district office in London in 1898. And within a few years, there are a whole host of advertising agencies operating in England, most of them English-owned and English-run, but some being branch offices of U.S. companies. And advertising starts to spread into the continent of Europe and to other countries. And with advertising agency comes a replication of some of the kinds of cultural innovations that were associated with the United States, like the development of mass circulation magazines, the primary purpose of which was to sell products and which required some art and writing in between the ads in order to make it palatable for people. And advertising agencies then also invested in other cultural forms, including the movies. But while the United States was and remains a major figure in the motion picture business, in the first 3 decades of motion pictures, 2.5 decades, the United States was actually a minor player in the development of motion pictures. To some degree, this was because Thomas Alva Edison, having been kicked out of General Electric in 1892, decided to dedicate himself to phonograph recording and motion picture technology. And he cornered all the patents in the United States in these two areas. And he policed those patents very fiercely so nobody else in the United States could use them. And he had a particularly limited idea of what could be done. He viewed the motion pictures and sound recordings as basically sideshow entertainments. He quickly developed, or his staff quickly developed, some of the basic principles of what would become the modern motion picture. In 1894, they shot the first synchronized sound motion picture. But that really was, yes?
Is that
No, it's not. That's just my screensaver. I'm going to show the jazz, we're going to look at sections of the Jazz Singer soon. So, well, I guess I could turn off my screensaver, but that's. Because of Edison's kind of monopoly control over this new technology within the United States and his conservative approach to it, the dominance in the motion picture form first went to France, where a practical projector system was developed in 1895 by the Lumiere brothers, which allowed for exhibiting films in large crowds. And several French companies became the dominant companies in film production, producing films that were seen all over the world. And in the United States, film production generally tended to be dominated by the French companies. So Edison tried to fight them, but their patents were based on French law, not U.S. law, and they had a whole different approach. So then he had to figure out how to coexist with the French companies. Between 1910 and 1914, the most important U.S. director of motion pictures was a French woman named Alice Guy, G-U-Y. She had, in fact, been the first director of a fiction film. She was a secretary at the Gaumont Company. In 1895, she belonged to an amateur theater group, and when she saw the films that were being made of water hoses being squirted and trains arriving and so forth, she said, I can do something better. So she got her theater group, and they produced a film called The Fairy and the Cabbage, which was the world's first fiction film, only 3 minutes long. In 1907, she was sent over to the United States to start a film studio in New Jersey, and she became the dominant figure in the U.S. Film industry, producing the most popular films. World War I, in 1912, Edison lost his patent monopolies, which made it easier for motion picture companies, small American motion picture companies, to form and begin to produce material that could compete with the French and Italian and Swedish films that generally dominated the world screens. Then with World War I breaking out in Europe, film production in Europe came to a stop, or pretty much to a complete stop. That allowed an opportunity for U.S. film companies to take over the market within the United States and then to supply international markets that were yearning for product because the traditional companies had been shut down or restricted because of the war. In the year, at this time, 1914 to 1916, you had dozens of small entrepreneurial companies making films. But in 1917, some Wall Street financiers decided to apply scientific management procedures to the production of films. And between 1917 and 1919, you have a complete reorganization of the film industry, so that having over 100 production companies in 1916, by 1920 you had essentially 6 major studios who were organized on the principle that the studio controlled every aspect of the production. They hired the writers, they hired the director, they had actors under contract. The films were produced on a factory kind of basis, and they went out to theaters that the studios also owned. It was a very successful system that brought economies of scale to motion pictures, which allowed much more elaborate and expensive product to be made because the film could recoup its investment through international sales. Essentially from the beginning, Hollywood was based on the principle that a successful film had to be shown all over the world, not simply in the United States. It had to be made for the world, or it wasn't likely to be successful. It wasn't likely to make enough money back. Of course, there were films made specifically for U.S. audiences, but those would have to have smaller budgets, and the sort of premiere products and with the major stars would be made for an international audience. So the Dream Factory became an important part of the U.S. economy and an important part of defining U.S. culture. I thought we would take a look at one of the more famous movies of the 1920s. It's the first feature-length synchronized sound film, The Jazz Singer. I think last week I incorrectly said that it starred Eddie Cantor, the comedian and singer who I showed you a small clip of. The star, in fact, was Al Jolson, who was, at the time the film made, the most popular singer, music star in the entire world. The Jazz Singer is notorious because of its use of blackface. That is, at a certain point in the film, Al Jolson puts black cork on his face to make himself look like he's Negro. To sing, there's 2 points in the film, and where he sings Southern darky songs, I think would probably be the best way to frame it. They're not actually African American songs. They're songs that people in the music industry had invented to imitate certain stereotypes of African American culture. But the film is actually an interesting examination of tensions in the United States within an immigrant community and how you adapt to a commercial society while maintaining your traditions. And so, I can't show you, we're not going to look at the whole film, but I think it would be interesting to